Well, it's hard to believe, but we've come to our final segment, and we're going to hear from our research institutions looking ahead to the future. And to do that, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Jay Hess, Dean of Indiana University School of Medicine. Dr. Hess, thanks for being here. Dr. Theresa Mayer, Vice President, Research, Purdue University, and Dr. Lynn Miranda, Charles and Jill Fischer, Provost, University of Notre Dame. Thanks to the both of you for being here as well. So I've got questions for each of you, and I'm sure this is all this last, I don't know, 18 to 20 months or so. It feels like you've probably moved mountains just to get a proper education for the kids, but also get the research done and everything else. So first of all, thank you, and I commend you for all the efforts to that regard. I'd like for each of you to answer the questions, but I'm going to start. Dr. Hess, I'll start with you. What's the biggest takeaway so far that you've learned in your area from COVID-19 and from dealing with it?
Well, first of all, thanks to BioCrossroads for organizing this terrific event today, and I appreciate the chance to be here. You know, there are many lessons, but I think the one that really stands out for me is the importance of building a collaborative infrastructure. So, for example, with the CTSI, we already had our connections with Notre Dame and Purdue and industry. As we had to develop plans to return to campus safely, we could call on each other. The CTSI had money available for pilot funding for COVID-related projects. Working with the Regan Street Institute, we got a tremendous amount of data that was useful in managing the pandemic. And then one of them, perhaps the most striking thing for me, was the All-In for Indiana project was a way of prospectively identifying subjects for human trials. And we were able to, for the AstraZeneca vaccine trial, identify 1,500 diverse participants overnight. So research infrastructure and collaborative infrastructure was very valuable.
And Dr. Mayer, I'm going to ask you the same question. Biggest takeaway?
Yes, I'd also just like to thank BioCrossroads for hosting the summit and the opportunity to visit with my colleagues from Notre Dame in Indiana today. I'll just echo on what Jay said and add a bit to it. It was really coming together. I think we not only came together throughout Indiana as we prepared for our return to operation, but also throughout the Midwest region, we were able to leverage the core strengths of the regions and the similarity to really come back in record time with minimal impact. And I would say that the ability to quickly tap in and leverage our pre-existing partnerships with industry as well, it really made a huge difference as we were grappling with the challenges that we were all facing.
Dr. Miranda?
Thank you. I'll add my thanks to the organizers of the conference. I've really enjoyed the sessions I've heard already. And Jay and Theresa, it's good to see you again. So I've started to sort of, when we talk about the COVID crisis, to start talking about it's really a polyvalent crisis, right? So we had COVID-19 happening, we had economic dislocation happening, we had the racial and social justice protests happening, and we had great demonstrations of the impacts of climate change happening all at the same time. And the reality is, particularly for young people across the board, but particularly for young people, I think there's a significant mental health crisis going on as well. And so for me, even though the question is about the learning during the COVID period, the learning for I think all of us is around the idea that all of these different components of this polyvalent crisis are quite connected. And the panel first thing this morning on inclusion made that point better than I ever could have about how do you make sure that people have access to care? How do you make sure people are not evicted in the middle of a global pandemic and all those sorts of things? So in addition to the points that Jay and Theresa made about the strength of the collaborations and the infrastructure, I think we learned an enormous amount about the connection between the life sciences questions and the social policy questions and the inequality and justice questions and climate questions and how they're all connected. And creating yet stronger infrastructure and bonds and collaborations across our universities and in collaboration with industry and also with government service providers and community groups who are concerned with this broader set of questions. And I think Indiana really recognized these connections and leverage those connections to serve the people of Indiana as well as they could. So it was an amazing thing to see, especially as someone who's relatively new to Indiana.
And Dr. Miranda, I'm going to stick with you to ask you this first of all. We did talk about a lot today about diversity and inclusivity and how we've learned a lot from all that through the course of the COVID pandemic. So how do we continue that moving forward, especially in your scientific programs, or what new things have you garnered from that, and how do we push that forward to make sure that we're being inclusive and diverse?
Yeah, you know, I think the issues around inclusivity and diversity, it's important to remember that COVID-19 sort of laid those issues bare in a way that was so stark that it was very difficult to ignore it. And at the same time, you had a whole series of racial and social protests around a series of very, very difficult and problematic events. So, but those are about longstanding and enduring problems. It's just that they were revealed in a way that made it much harder to ignore. I think that all universities in particular right now are trying to leverage the fact that those difficulties are very difficult to ignore right now to create more inclusive environments. So we certainly have accelerated our recruitment efforts for students at both the undergraduate and the graduate level on the basis of income diversity and racial and ethnic diversity. We have certainly accelerated our faculty recruitment around that. We've also made sure that that we don't think about diversity and creating an inclusive environment as being the job of people of color or people from low resource backgrounds, but that it is, you know, sort of conveying this idea that it's the responsibility of the entire university, which is of course fully aligned with Notre Dame's Catholic mission. And the last thing I'll say is that we've launched a whole series of programs that are specifically designed not just to recruit people to come to Notre Dame, but to make sure that when they arrive here, they have a positive experience. And leveraging connections with industry and with our academic partners across the state is helping us do that, because there might be, you know, special research internships for our students or special collaborations for our faculty, whether with another university or with industry. So that broader set of connections across the entire state helps us to do that better.
All right. Dr. Mayer, same question.
Yes, I think that at Purdue, we are really doubling down on our land-grant mission. So as a land-grant institution, it is a key part of our DNA to really make sure that we're here to serve the broad community of Indiana and ensure that our student body is reflected of the general community that we represent and we serve. So as part of that, and coming out of the COVID crisis, there was a recognition that it was time for a substantial investment to double down on both the recruitment, as Miranda said, and also the ongoing support for first generation and underrepresented students. And so we have announced an initial $30 million investment over 5 years to really help with all aspects of those priorities. And again, I just want to once again underscore the strong partnerships that we have with foundations and our federal agencies and industry in achieving the goals that we've set forth to achieve.
And Dr. Hess?
Well, there's definitely some similar themes. I think we've always had a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. 20% of our medical school class are diverse, but we do need to do more for faculty. And Indiana University under President Whidden also has made a $30 million commitment to help recruit more diverse faculty. And we've increasingly focused on how do we recruit from within more, developing a pathway so that, for example, our residents and fellows who are doing clinical training, we reach out to them early and recruit them as faculty, and then there's mentoring. The second thing is that there's some very exciting work going on in community health with the CTSI and being very focused, where are the areas of greatest need? And one of them is in infant and maternal mortality. And Indiana's, has not had a good track record in that, but with collaborating with the state and other institutions, we actually had the lowest infant mortality rate since we started tracking that. And the disparity for Black women and infants has improved. And then finally, with our health systems, one of the steps we've taken is, together with Dennis Murphy with IU Health, is to create a position, Chief Health Equity Officer, and deliberately go through the data on the patients in IU Health in terms of outcomes and their experience as patients, even their experience with things like billing and all. And just like with community health, prioritizing where are the areas where we can make the biggest difference in people's lives and all. So I really think it's an extremely important time for us to recognize that we're in it for the long haul. I mean, we've created these positions and all, but this is going to be decades of work to continue to move the needle.
Each of you has talked about the importance of collaboration, and we've discussed it throughout the summit today. Certainly, that's something that's really come to light throughout the COVID pandemic. It certainly was happening beforehand, but we've had to do it virtually, just like we're doing right now, right? So how has that changed the way that you do collaborate, the way that you approach the collaboration, and how do you see that moving forward? And Dr. Mayer, I'm going to start with you on this question.
Yeah, thanks. Just a great question. I'd just like to add one piece to that. It's not only collaborating virtually, I think it's working at an accelerated pace and what can we learn. So certainly some good is going to come out of the global challenge, such as the pandemic, that can be applied to many other sectors in the health sector and life sciences sector more broadly. I'd like to just highlight 3 primary points as we look back and we were facing this global pandemic. It's really driving open science. The move towards sharing of data, because that data was critical in order to really rally an effective response and a rapid response. And for the academic community, but also more broadly, the ability to publish that data very, very rapidly, but still in a peer-reviewed manner. So I think that was a great advance. Secondly, I think that what we're learning in this accelerated pace, it's driving us even faster towards using computation in a data-driven approach to speed the innovation cycle. So this has been certainly underway in bioinformatics for many and many years. But I think we're increasingly seeing a movement towards concepts such as the digital twin for health, and taking those concepts and even thinking about radically new approaches to clinical trials that can speed and reduce the cost of those clinical trials. And then the last point that I'd like to make is certainly what we've learned through the accelerated adoption and validation of the vaccinations is that we can't lower some of the regulatory burdens that our country faces, and it was still with very good efficacy and outcomes. And so looking at the development cycle all the way through how to mobilize for scalable manufacturing. So I think that's another thing that will not only apply to the ongoing pharmaceutical industry, but many other industries that the country relies on for economic success and prosperity.
All right, and Dr. Miranda, the same with you. This accelerated pace by way of virtual collaboration, what impact has that had?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I don't like going after Theresa on this question because she made a couple of the points that I would have made. On open science, I would push that point even harder and say that in addition to open science, the willingness of people to put things up very early on medRxiv and bioRxiv. So, and even before things were peer reviewed, to get eyes on it, to get critiques on it, to get commentary on it, to sharpen the science, the willingness of scientists to sort of say, this is too important for us not to put everything that we're learning up as soon as we think we've learned it. And I'm hoping that that is a trend that continues. I certainly agree with the point on data science as well. A third point that I'll add is that I think that because including in this conference right now, right, because there's so much that we had to do virtually, there was a certain stickiness to, well, I can't get a project going. I can't really work on a project if someone's too far away. You have to schedule all these visits and it's time consuming, et cetera. And I think people found out that they could get projects going, they could get good work going with people. And if it was at your university, it was still virtually. So it was easier to think about doing it with another university or doing it with industry partners, et cetera. So it just sort of goosed people to think about their set of collaborators in a broader way. Now, of course, that in-person exchange and pushing each other and sharpening each other's ideas is still important. And now that we're able to do that, it's good that we're taking advantage of the opportunity to be in the same room when we can. But I think that our scientists at both universities and industry have discovered that it's possible to advance and engage in a lot of ideas, even if you have to begin virtually. And that is only going to enrich the set of collaborations that are going on all over the state and the region, for that matter.
And Dr. Hess, what would you like to add?
Well, a lot of great points have been made already. I do think that virtual collaboration does facilitate moving quickly and all. I think a last thought would be the amount of science and innovation that happens as a result of spontaneous interactions, getting to know people, building trust and all. I actually think there are a lot of people that are longing for more in-person interactions and social events. And I still think that's going to be an important part going forward, that we'll never really be able to do all of the innovative things we want to do without having those kind of interactions as well.
Well, Dr. Hess, Dr. Mayer, Dr. Miranda, thank you so much, especially for all the work you've done over the past 20 months or so, but also thank you for the future work and our future scientists that you're creating. Thank you so much. And with that, I get to say goodbye. Thank you all, and I'm going to kick it over to Patty for the conclusion of today's event. Patty?